Just over a week ago, the U.S. Department of Justice released 3.5 million of the 6 million pages of documents in the so-called Epstein files. And by now, we've all heard the accusation that, for example, Bill Gates caught an STD from Russian girls and then tearfully pleaded with Jeffrey Epstein to please provide him with antibiotics so he could surreptitiously drug Melinda.
Epstein claimed he helped, quote, get drugs in order to deal with the consequences of sex with Russian girls and set up illicit trysts. One draft email alleges that Gates tearfully asked Epstein to delete messages referencing an STD, writing, "Your request that I provide you antibiotics that you surreptitiously give to Melinda." It also says Gates asked him to delete explicit personal details about his penis.
Kind of gives a whole new meaning to Microsoft. Get it? And we've all seen Elon Musk pleading with Jeffrey Epstein to please allow him to attend the wildest parties on his pedophile island.
Elon says, "Do you have any parties planned? I really want to hit the party scene in St. Bart's or elsewhere and let loose."
I'm sorry, I hate to do this. Can we zoom in on the email on that, please? Christmas Day?
And we've all seen fake news story of the year recipient Donald J. Trump repeating his "nothing to see here" meme routine.
I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else, really.
But he would say that, wouldn't he? No, the Epstein files are not a nothing burger. In fact, they provide one of the most valuable insights into the operations of the kakistocracy yet revealed, but you won't see any real reporting on the depths of this rabbit hole in the dinosaur media. So what do the Epstein files really reveal? Let's find out.
You're listening to the Corbett Report.
What do I mean? He formed something called the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission is some spooky stuff. People said it was something, the Illuminati, there's some mystery about it, people that ran the world. It was politicians, but David said most countries, the politicians get elected for 4 years or 8 years, separate from the royal families in England or in the Middle East. Someone's there for 4 years and then they're not there anymore. The most important people to have stability and consistency would be businessmen. So he formed this Trilateral Commission of businessmen and politicians from 3 major continents. So it was the North Americans, the Europeans, and the Asians. So he said to me, "Would you like to be on the Trilateral Commission?" Now, I was 30 years old, 32 years old. I said, "Great." And he said, "Well, you have to fill out this application so they have your bio." And I looked at the list of people, and it was Bill Clinton, former president of the United States, Paul Volcker, every great leader in America, the Asians, the Japanese, and with a very long description of their history. And they asked me to fill in what I would like to have written. And I wrote Jeffrey Epstein, comma, just a good kid, which I thought was funny, nobody else did.
Welcome back, friends, to the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of Corbettreport.com, coming to you in February of 2026 with episode 491 of the Corbett Report podcast, What I Learned from the Epstein Files. And that, as you probably garnered, was none other than Pedo King himself, Jeffrey Epstein, being recorded in a sit-down interview that took place shortly before his arrest in 2019 and was conducted by none other than MAGA kingpin Steve Bannon. So why did Steve Bannon participate in not just one, but a series of interviews that we are told comprise 15 hours of interview footage shortly before Epstein's arrest there in 2019? Good question, and I guess the answer to that question, as usual, depends on who you ask. If you ask Bannon himself, he'll tell you it was for the creation of a tell-all expose documentary about the inner workings of the deep state and how these pedophiles operate. But that's not what everyone says. So this is something that we've known about for a couple of years now. Back in 2024, it was being reported Steve Bannon filmed Jeffrey Epstein for 15 hours, but his documentary has never surfaced. And even back then in 2024, a short clip was released by Bannon and his production company, Victory Films, to tease such a documentary that was coming soon. But it's been coming soon for the past couple of years now. And Bannon's explanation about this documentary, that it's for this tell-all expose and it's an anti-Epstein sort of thing. Well, according to this article anyway, Bannon's explanation that he was producing a documentary about Epstein was nonsense, according to people who spent time with both men around the time they were in each other's lives. In reality, the two acted like friends around each other, and Bannon, these people said, was trying to help Epstein, a notorious sex offender, with his public relations problems. And yes, if you want more on the Bannon/Epstein relationship, Politico was reporting this recently. The two dined together frequently, and Epstein offered Bannon the use of a Paris apartment, Palm Beach house, and other accommodations, as well as his plane on multiple occasions. When Epstein helped coordinate other travel for Bannon, the two joked that Epstein was working as Bannon's assistant and the most highly paid travel agent in history. In one instance, Epstein added, "massages not included." Yes, interesting. Well, interestinger and interestinger, because why have we not seen this 15 hours of interview footage yet? And why are we now just getting 2 hours of that footage in this latest Epstein Files dump? Well, part of the reason may or may not have to do with an obscure legal tactic that was apparently at least discussed, in which Steve Bannon, a non-lawyer, would be able to use, I believe it's called the Koval clause or something along those lines, to declare himself part of Epstein's legal team and thus shield his work through attorney-client privilege. Just really bizarre relationship there, but it's just one tiny sliver of a window into the much larger story, and one that, for example, connects, as we've seen, Bannon with Chomsky palling around. What's the common connection there? Oh, that's right, Epstein. They're both pals of Epstein who palled around with him, flew on his jet, and both weirdly interested in protecting Epstein's reputation. Make of that, all of that, what you will. At any rate, well, yes, now I'm here to tell you there are 2 hours of the 15 hours of interview footage that Bannon took with Epstein now publicly available. I will link it in the show notes for today's episode at Corbettreport.com/Epstein files so that you can go and check it out for yourself. And it includes clips like that one, which includes an interesting piece of information that I confess I should have known, but I did not until I sat down and watched this interview, that, namely, Epstein was personally invited by David Rockefeller to join the Trilateral Commission. And the timeline on that is all screwy and wonky because he's talking about being 30 to 32 years old at the time, putting this in the 80s. But then they go on to talk about the first Trilateral Commission meeting in Tokyo, which took place in 1973. So is that the one they're talking about? Presumably not. Does he mean his first Trilateral Commission meeting, et cetera, et cetera? Well, there's a lot of questions surrounding this, but there it is, and take it for what it is. But you would know about all of that if you had read my latest editorial. It's called 10 Things I Learned from the Epstein Files. It's up right now at Corbettreport.com and, of course, on my Substack. And if you go through that, you'll learn various things that we've already managed to uncover from these Epstein files. For example, Epstein was an agent and he was working for ... Which country? Fill in the blank. What do you think? Well, if you talk to the mainstream repeaters at the Daily Mail and other such crack journalistic outfits, you'll find he was working for Russia. Yes, as the Daily Mail reports, Epstein's sex empire was a quote-unquote KGB honey trap. Yes, he was recruiting people and blackmailing people for Russia for reasons, apparently. Or maybe, and just maybe, hear me out here, maybe Epstein was a Mossad agent. And I go through some of the many, many reasons that we would have to suspect that. The many, many ties between Epstein and Israel and Israeli intelligence, like the Israeli military intelligence officer and personal aide to Ehud Barak, who spent weeks at a time at Epstein's Manhattan apartment. Epstein personally involved in helping Israel sell a surveillance state to Cote d'Ivoire, personally involved in helping Israel sell logistics infrastructure and cybersecurity security to the United Arab Emirates. Epstein personally involved in helping sell the Rothschilds on Israeli cyber weapons. There's of course, the Epstein/Dershowitz link, and both of them working to smear John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, who at the time were working to expose the Israel lobby. And dozens of other stories reported, for example, by Dropsite News in their ongoing and extensive Israel Epstein archive, or The Cradle talking about Epstein's Israel ties. So, just maybe the Epstein story has to do with Israeli intelligence. We could also get that from a confidential human source in one of these documents, reporting to the FBI that, quote, Epstein was close to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and trained as a spy under him. Barak believed Netanyahu was a criminal. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates are allied against Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. One of the confidential human sources, blank, redacted, asked CHS a lot of questions about Epstein. CHS became convinced that Epstein was a co-opted Mossad agent. See previous reporting. So again, make of all of that what you will. There's much more to go into. I, for example, go into Jeff Epstein was a Fed truther who represented the Rothschilds. Yes, also from this Bannon interview footage, we see Epstein expounding on fractional reserve banking, which, again, anyone in the conspiracy reality movement will have known about for decades, because presumably they've read things like J. Edgar Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island, or they've seen my documentary on Century of Enslavement, the history of the Federal Reserve. But here it is from the banksters' own mouths, or at least one of their representatives, Epstein, talking about fractional reserve banking and what a scam it is and why there would be runs on the bank if people knew how the system actually worked. Where have we heard that line before? Again, much more information on that. Also, the intriguing 2016 email that Epstein penned to Peter Thiel, yes, that Peter Thiel, in which he casually asserts, as you probably know, I represent the Rothschilds, which is just, interesting. And is he talking about his weird relationship with Ariane de Rothschild and their interesting correspondence? Or is he talking about the wider reaching relationship that he had with the Rothschild banking dynasty that, for example, the aforementioned ties into the selling the Israeli cyber weapons to the Rothschilds? I go through other little bits and pieces that are interesting. Someone changed Epstein's Apple ID password after he was dead, and you can actually see that for yourself in the files. The MCC, the Metropolitan Correction Center officer who wrote an after-action report that was recorded in which he confessed to using boxes and sheets to construct a fake Epstein body that was then used to distract the media when they were removing the body, quote unquote, from the MCC, or at least from the hospital on the night of the supposed suicide. I go through Epstein's links to the Trilateral Commission, and I link up, for example, a very extensive and interesting article on that from Rockefeller to Starmer, mapping the Trilateral Network in the Epstein files. I talk about Pizzagate and the many, many, many bizarre pizza references in here, like the Pizza Monster email thread. You mean radiating a soft glow with the look of bliss and excitement? Yeah, that's the pizza, or butt pizza and other pizza references. But Pizzagate was all a debunked conspiracy theory, so said Reddit a few years ago. Well, now, of course, Reddit is the ones that are going, hey, maybe there's something to this Pizzagate. Epstein and 4chan, yes. Christopher Poole, the founder of 4chan, met personally with Epstein. Epstein said he was very impressed by him. They wanted to meet again. Maybe they did meet again. When did they meet? Oh, on October 23rd, 2011, or then thereabouts. And oh, by the way, that's the exact date of the relaunch of the politically incorrect board on 4chan. Interesting stuff there. Epstein co-opted Bitcoin and made Call of Duty a microtransaction hellscape. The latter point, perhaps not so important, but the co-optation of Bitcoin is an incredibly important story. It's been well reported in an article I'm linking here by Aaron Day at the Brownstone Institute called The Hijacking of Bitcoin. And he goes through, step by step, the exact ways that Epstein was linked up with the small blockers to create to divert Bitcoin into the government-compliant, regulatory, non-crypto that it is today. And there's specific talk about, for example, $525,000 grant to MIT's Media Lab Digital Currency Initiative and $500,000 investment in Blockstream, etc. Again, so much reporting and very important stuff in there. So I will highly recommend that people check out that Aaron Day article. I talk about Glenn being invited to the 9/11 Shadow Commission by an Edward J. Epstein. no relation. What that was all about, I link up, for example, the Wayback Archive of the page that was being linked to there and what that may or may not be. And Epstein didn't kill himself. Well, we'll get to that later. So there's 10 points, and there's dozens and dozens and dozens of links in here. So I would highly suggest, if you haven't seen this article yet, please check it out. But in the purpose of expanding on this research for today's episode, I'm going to go through 5 more things I learned from the Epstein files. So if you are buckled in and ready and have your pen and paper at hand, let's start going through them. Number 1, Epstein's black market in babies. And we get weird hints of that from redacted emails from who knows who to who knows who. External email, woman who accused John of God, cult leader, of rape, mysteriously kills herself at Spanish home, which apparently seems to be just a link to this Sun article. But redacted spoke of this going on at Zorro Ranch. She has said on record that Epstein offered her money to do this, birth babies for black market use. And if you want to start delving down that rabbit hole, you can start going to things like this, which is one of the documents that was released is a journal of sorts of someone who was undergoing therapy, an Epstein victim. And it's truly disturbing, but at any rate, you can see, for example, something that appears to be blood or blood-like stained pages. And then you get this page of this bizarre code that you realize you have to read in 2 lines. So sorry, Jeffrey, these things happen when you're, etc., etc. So you can go and really, literally read everything for yourself, or thankfully, the DOJ has apparently actually interpreted this code. And here it is. So sorry, Jeffrey, these things happen when your body has never been given time to properly heal. So it came out in the toilet, and I didn't know what to do, so I just flushed the tiny little fetus. You have made me numb, and I hate you for this. I hope I never have to see you again. I am not your personal incubator. Where is the baby? Where is Glenn? And you can actually, again, go and read all of this for yourself in this creepy journal of trauma that this person left. That's part of this document release. There are other journals by the same person or a different person talking about more such creepy stuff. There's, for example, this page, which again has some sort of redacted picture in here, and then more text, which again, there is an accompanying document that tells us what this is. For example, next to sonogram photo. So that is apparently what is being redacted here, is a sonogram photo. I heard the heartbeat even when she put her hand over my ears. Aren't pictures enough for them? Torture. Should I deeply miss them? Have these all been murders? Does this make me a killer? Etc. Have these all been murders? Does this make me a killer? Flights and yachts of fancy? No, horror. And talking about what happened on those flights, etc., etc. So yes, there is more to this story, obviously. And there is an excellent post up on LifeSite News about ignored in the release of Epstein files are victim references to traumatic abortions and lost babies, which I will commend to your attention. It has a lot of this information and compiles a lot of the documents and emails, etc. So that is a handy way of putting your head around this incredibly dark subject, but that is just one of the things that we are learning from these files. Number 2, or should this be number 12, I suppose, if we're counting the first 10, genetic editing of babies and animals. Again, a creepy subject, which you can start exploring by looking, for example, at the Brian Bishop communications with Epstein. There's many, many things that they had about genetic engineering, designer babies, new genetic editing desk, references for embryo editing, etc., etc. They had an extensive correspondence about this, and you can find out more about that from some of the reporting that's happened about this. Epstein linked to designer baby empire in latest files that reveal bid to engineer superhumans and clones, talking about this correspondence with Brian Bishop, a Bitcoin developer, who in 2018 was seeking financial backing for a venture aimed at genetically enhancing offspring and ultimately replicating humans. So there was some weird baby cloning, whatever was going on. Who knows exactly what was happening there, but I'll just put this in there. Go to Gmail and search for hoofs. That word and you'll find an email from Jeffrey Epstein to a Kathleen Rumler saying, "We talked about designing a pig with different non-cloven hoofs in order to make kosher bacon," etc. Again, all sorts of really, really bizarre and potentially occultic stuff going on in these emails. That's just one more window on that. So let's move on to number 13. Pandemics as a business model. So in my 10 things I learned from the Epstein Files article, I did call on members of the Corbett Report community to chip in with your, what do you find? What are interesting pieces of this puzzle that you find? And at least one of the Corbett Report members, Beware the Ides of March, answered the call. "Dear James, you said we could contribute here if we thought there was an angle on Epstein worth looking at. This 4-part investigation looks well-researched and properly referenced. Here's part 4 for your perusal." And then Beware the Ides of March links to Sayer G's article, "Breaking the Epstein Files Illuminated 20-Year Architecture Behind Pandemics as a Business Model, with Bill Gates at the center of the network," which notes the latest DOJ batch of Epstein files reveal that by the time the world encountered COVID-19, the financial, philanthropic, and institutional machinery to manage and profit from a pandemic was already firmly in place. Public records, institutional initiatives, and financial instruments indicate that the conceptual foundations of pandemic preparedness as a managed financial and security category began to take shape in the late 1990s and early 2000s as philanthropic capital, global health governance, and risk finance increasingly converged. Following the 2008 financial crisis, this framework rapidly accelerated, expanding through reinsurance markets, parametric triggers, donor-advised funding structures, and global simulations, years before COVID-19 made the architecture visible to the public. And I will not go through this entire article for you right here, but Sayer G has done an incredible job of putting this together, starting with this 20-year pandemic preparedness architecture timeline, which exactly corresponds to all of the research that I have done on this. Late 1990s to early 2000s, the foundations were being laid through philanthropy and global health governance. And that's exactly right from my research on this matter. For example, of course, the dark winter / anthrax attacks of 2001, leading into the model state health emergency acts that were being passed all around the United States in subsequent years that laid the framework, the institutional and legislative framework for state governors to start locking down their populations and force inoculating them in the event of a declared pandemic. And the 2006 international health regulations at the World Health Organization that created the public health emergency of international concern, the PHEIC, PHEIC, designation that was then used in the swine flu and Ebola and other such ginned up non-crises before getting to the scamdemic. Post-2008, you had the acceleration in terms of financialization and reinsurance and catastrophe logic of the pandemic preparedness agenda. And then in the 2010s, you have the operationalization of that agenda through simulations, DAFs, and preparedness infrastructure. What's a DAF, a donor advised fund? Well, Sayer G again goes through all of that in this incredibly detailed article. And the best part about the article is he doesn't just talk about the documents, he'll actually show the documents. And absolutely best of all is at the very bottom of this incredibly lengthy and well-researched article, you have the actual notes with the actual references and that you would use as a researcher to go and put these puzzle pieces together for yourself. So once again, this is highly recommended. Thank you to Beware the Ides of March for bringing this to my attention. Thank you to Sayer G for putting this work together. It's incredibly important and shows more of the inner workings of that pandemic preparedness agenda, how it came about, and how Epstein was apparently one of the locuses of this agenda, connecting JP Morgan with Gates, etc., and other donors and other such things together in this network that created the foundations of the scamdemic. And there are all sorts of ancillary documents, JP Morgan documents and Gates Foundation documents, etc., that are, again, part of this document release that show even more, as Sayer G highlights in this article. But let's move on to point 4 or point 14, depending on which numeral reference we're using here. The DOJ had a draft of Epstein's death announcement the day before he died. That's right. You will, of course, know that, of course, Epstein killed himself on August 10th, 2019, right? Well, according to the U.S. Attorney General's office in the Southern District of New York, there was an August 9th press release talking about how earlier this morning, the morning of the 9th, the Manhattan Correctional Center confirmed that Jeffrey Epstein, who faced charges brought by the office of engaging in the sex trafficking of minors, had been found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead shortly thereafter. But that's not what happened. Oh, no, it happened on August 10th. And that document has also been released. Of course, this is the press release where it was almost word for word exactly the same. Earlier this morning, the Manhattan Correctional Center confirmed that Jeffrey Epstein, who faced charges brought by the office of engaging in the sex trafficking of minors, had been found unresponsive in his cell. And then it says, and was pronounced dead shortly thereafter of an apparent suicide. So literally on August 9th, the day before any of this happened, they had a press release about his death, announcing his death. And then when it supposedly actually happened on the 10th, they had a press release, the almost word for word the same, but adding that apparent suicide. Right. Okay. I'm not the only one who finds this a little bit odd. Oh, maybe some intern screwed up and put the wrong date on the wrong one or something and they corrected it. Well, mainstream outlets too, picking up on this. Epstein files reveal prosecutor's announcement dated before his death. Yes, which does seem to be kind of a bit of a strange phenomenon, and one that at least deserves some explanation, doesn't it? Along with many other things that we could point out. For example, Epstein cellmate claims Trump administration wanted pervert power broker dead, talking about Jeffrey Epstein's prison cellmate claims to have evidence that the Trump administration wanted the disgraced financier dead and left him unprotected on purpose. Of course, who is the cellmate? Nicholas Tartaglione, a quadruple murderer and former police officer who had a reputation for extreme violence and a self-confessed hatred of child sex offenders, who claims it was no coincidence that he was deliberately moved into the same cell as Epstein and placed in the same cell as the convicted child sex offender, but then removed the night before. Whatever happened. Which leads us to point 5 of the 5 more things I learned, point 15 of the overall list of what we learned from the Epstein files. Epstein didn't kill himself. Okay, no, we don't really learn the truth about what happened or didn't happen on the night of August 10th in these files, but we shouldn't expect that would be in these files. There are things that have been released, like new photos of people working on his body at the scene, etc., etc. But as we know, they were using tactics like boxes and sheets stuffed into bags to trick reporters about his body. So what we know is, of course, more and more and more of the weirdness that certainly does not prove anything. What Kash Patel and Dan Bongino just looked you straight in the eye and lied to your face. He killed himself. I've seen suicides before. I've looked at the files and they show that he killed himself. No, they do not. No, they do not. And I guess we could put the bookends on this entire story by taking a look at a couple of AP News articles. The first one, Justice Department releases largest batch yet of Epstein documents and say it totals 3 million pages. So that was how it started, and this is how it ended. FBI concluded Jeffrey Epstein wasn't running a sex trafficking ring for powerful men. Files show, talking about some of the documents within this release, which show that, oh, he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't, whatever, who cares, guys? Look somewhere else. At least that's what the internal documents which have been released now show. The internal FBI and DOJ investigation showed that there was no list, there was no nothing, it's all fine, don't think about it. Well, as you can tell, there's a lot in here, and much, much more that I could go through. Everything I have talked about, everything I'm referencing, will be in the show notes for today's episode at corbettreport.com/Epstein files. So please go there for the more information on this. But having said that, if you want some more of the strangeness in these files, you could turn to Nick Bryant, who you will know is a previous Corbett Report guest for his work with EpsteinJustice.com, which you will know is an organization that is organizing and rallying in support of the Epstein victims and achieving justice for the crimes of Epstein and his kakistocracy crew. Well, Nick Bryant has an interesting post up, the Epstein emails from the very strange to the very, very evil, in which he talks about some of these things. And just right off the top, he talks about one of the released emails here is a group email from Redacted to a group list, subject journalist calling around from 2011. Just a heads up, there is a journalist calling around again. His name is Nick Bryant. This is what he looks like, so you are all aware. So literally an APB, an all points bulletin being put out by the Epstein crew to be on the lookout for Nick Bryant back in 2011, because as my listeners will know, Nick Bryant was one of the OG researchers on this way before the Miami Journal or whatever, or any of those reporters had even heard of this case. Bryant was on it. He was the one who released the Black Book and the flight logs in the first place, et cetera, et cetera. So he's been doing yeoman's work on this subject and the Franklin scandal before it and other work along these lines for decades now. So I recently contacted Nick Bryant to ask him about some of the very interesting emails that he's uncovered and which he has itemized here in this Epstein emails post.
Well, the first category is whores. I mean, there are a lot of whores in these emails. I mean, evil of an almost incomprehensible kind. Evil that I have come across before. With the Franklin scandal, there was extreme abuse, and there was also accounts of children being murdered, and we're seeing that with Epstein. And then I've got muffins, steaks, pizza, etc. And then there's power brokers and celebrities. And it turned out that Epstein was Thiel and Musk and Zuckerberg, our favorite humans on the planet, were getting together, and Epstein was wondering, it's an email, and Epstein was wondering if he could make it with those swell guys. Deepak Chopra shows up occasionally. This one's kind of interesting. God is a construct. Cute girls are real. So underneath all that high-powered metaphysical spirituality, Deepak Chopra has some major lower chakra predilections. And then there's kind of an interesting one. David Boies, the super lawyer who represented all the Epstein victims. He was invited to Epstein's Yom Kippur breakfast in 2010. And there's another attorney that represented a number of those victims named Stan Podger, who's very, very dirty. And the next category is transhumanism, biohacking, mind control, etc. And that certainly has some interesting emails. And then the next category is FBI, CIA, Mossad. And then there were a couple of emails that didn't quite fit into any other category. So I just said additional strange emails.
Absolutely incredibly interesting list. And this is, of course, only scratching the surface of the 3 million pages of documents that have been released, including many, many emails. Too many for any one human to handle, but let's go through a few of the more interesting ones right here. So, for example, Jeffrey Epstein emailed an unknown individual stating he loved a torture video shared between the two. And you can see, obviously, that you can see the actual emails in the email list, but here's some images of it. And Peter Mandelson, this is just speculation, right? We don't know that is the name under there, but it just happens to fit.
It does indeed, and he had formerly been the UK ambassador to the United States of America, which is a very prestigious post. And apparently he likes torture.
I loved the torture video. Yeah. Well, no, yeah, well, okay. Jeffrey loved the torture video. We don't know. Yeah. We don't know what the person who sent it thought of it, at any rate.
So, with this, Mandelson is taking a lot of heat in the UK, and he's had to step down from all his prestigious posts. So, actually, there's a minor amount of accountability here.
Something has occurred.
Yes.
Okay, how about this one? If true, this Jeffrey Epstein-oriented email beggars belief the abuse was off the scale. And we're looking at something from Eddie Aragon and forward confidential Jeffrey Epstein. This is sensitive, so it will be the first and last email depending on your discretion. You can choose to take it or trash it, but this comes from a person that has been there and seen it as a former staff at the Zorro. And this person is talking about what is damning about Jeffrey Epstein is yet to be written. Did you know somewhere in the hills outside the Zorro, 2 foreign girls were buried on orders of Jeffrey and Madame G. Galen, presumably. Both died by strangulation during rough fetish sex. And here are the video footage of Jeffrey Epstein, including sex video with minor, Matthew Mellon video, etc., suicide attempt confession, etc., etc. And apparently somebody who claims to have been a former Zorro staffer was attempting to get 1 Bitcoin in return for this information. What do we make of this?
Well, there's other very, very dark emails that allude to homicides. So did this happen? I mean, that's the question. If you look at the totality of emails and just the amount of blood that's just dripping off of them, an email like this doesn't really seem that far-fetched in that context.
Yeah, no, it certainly doesn't. It's par for the course, unfortunately. All right, let's look at this one from forward to J.E.E. Epstein regarding Richard Johnson. This is from Mark Tramo. And what are we looking at here? Thanks for sending Richard Johnson my way. I trust the kind words I shared with him are acceptable, etc., etc. Was just reading today that newborns will suck on a pacifier more vigorously if it triggers playback of a recording of her/his mother's voice than another woman's voice. Have you read David Brooks's Social Animal? What are we looking at here?
Well, if it's talking about ways to get babies to suck harder in a very malevolent kind of way, I mean, this is rarefied evil.
They blacked out the name of the person who sent Epstein an image labeled age 11. Why protect the predator? And yes, this is an email from the archives sent from somebody. We don't know. Just labeled age 11, full-size render.jpg. So this is an image file. The image file itself, obviously not released, question mark.
And here's the thing. The media and the government have said that Epstein's youngest victim was 14 years old, but I've heard accounts of victims that are much younger. There's an Australian newspaper called The Age. I think it's out of Sydney. It's a daily. They spent a lot of time in the Virgin Islands, and they said that the youngest victims there were 11 or 12. Virginia Giuffre submitted an affidavit that talked about various perpetrators, and she said that she'd attended orgies where the youngest girl was 12, and most of them couldn't speak English. But I know a couple of therapists, and one's a pretty eminent psychologist, and both have counseled Epstein victims who were trafficked when they were under the age of 10. So I know that this is going to be that somebody's going to try to clean this up. But because it's very strange, people think that like 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds have agency. I mean, that's how they've kind of justified it in their mind with regards to Jeffrey Epstein. And I don't feel that way, but when you get into 11-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 9-year-olds, I mean, how can they possibly have agency? So that's, I think, one of the things that really needs to be broken open here is that these guys were psychopaths. And we saw it in the Franklin scandal, too. The 2 primary pimps were into pubescent boys. But if you wanted a 7 or 8-year-old, they didn't have a problem getting you a 7 or 8-year-old. So, I mean, they're psychopaths. It's not like they've got a conscience to deal with. So with this, and that's another thing where the mainstream media has really shortchanged Americans, is they made Epstein and Maxwell seem kind of glamorous, living on the Upper East Side, traveling all over. But human traffickers are vicious people, whether they're living in a mansion on the Upper East Side or they're living in a trailer court in the Midwest. Human traffickers are vicious, vicious people.
As we talked about, Deepak Chopra to Epstein, God is a construct, cute girls are real. And this person notes they're all in on it. The entire world is a stage. So yes, sorry to any Deepak Chopra fans out in the crowd who might have held out hope. One more. Again, there's dozens of links in this document that we're linking up here, but let's take a look at one more. Evidence of the presence of American laboratories for the development of biological weapons in Ukraine has been found in the Epstein files as previously reported by the Russian Defense Ministry on numerous occasions, but of course derided as crazy Russian conspiracy theory. And here are the emails themselves. Yeah, a lot of biological, scientific papers and documents and emails and things in these records that we're finding, aren't there?
There's gene editing. There's doing very strange things to babies. There's cloning. And cloning is a reality. People in New York City clone their French bulldogs for $65,000. And I think you can clone a human for about $1.5 million. When Dolly the sheep was cloned in the mid-90s, I actually had written some articles for Genetic Engineering News, which was one of the papers that broke that. And it's very easy to clone. You just have to get an ovum and take the DNA out of the ovum and stick the DNA that you want cloned in the ovum and then give it an electrical charge. Sometimes the charge will start mitosis and the cells will start splitting, and sometimes they won't. But it's very easy to clone. And back then, even before I got into the Franklin scandal and all this dark, malevolent stuff, I thought to myself, there's got to be megalomaniac billionaires out there cloning themselves. So that was when I saw his thing was about cloning and transhumanism, I kind of figured that would be a natural outcome.
Yeah. Of course. If you can imagine it and we have indications of it, then it is probably already happening. And here are some more indications of that. And as I say, these are just a few of the emails of the ones that you have highlighted from the literally thousands and tens of thousands that we've just been flooded with. So there's much, much more to go through. But let's talk about, obviously, I know that you work at EpsteinJustice.com, working for and with the survivors and victims of these crimes. What are the people in your network saying about this latest file release and what is or is not happening as a result of it?
Well, it's daunting. All these emails with so much evil, I mean, it's daunting. And people that have been victims of sexual abuse that have been traumatized, I mean, this is very hard stuff for them to read. And there's 3 million documents that have yet to be released. I mean, these are bad, but you can only imagine how bad those are. But
so what is the next step for Epstein Justice then? How do we continue putting pressure to get those documents?
It's waking people up. I mean, Epstein Justice is growing. When we first started talking about Epstein Justice, we had just started. And I'd been a writer my entire life. I'd never, I'd never been a director of 501c3. I'd never even worked for a 501c3. And the people that wanted to do this with me, none of us had any kind of experience working with a 501c3. But we just felt like this is something we had to do. So now we have a plan. Well, we've always had a plan for the Independent Congressional Commission. And that does not require a presidential signature. It just requires a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. And independent congressional commissions generally hire non-government personnel to help them with investigations. And that's what we're going to need. If this thing ends up in a subcommittee, it's going to die, for sure. The only chance that we have for truth with this is an independent congressional commission that is completely devoid of any executive signature. It's going to take a lot. Together, Epstein Justice, we're putting together Facebook groups by state, and we're having those respective groups put pressure on their legislators. Now, they cannot feel our pressure yet, but as these groups grow and grow, and they are growing, as they continue to grow, these legislators will start feeling the heat from an inundation of emails and phone calls. And that's the only way that you can get a politician to act, is if they feel fear. And I realize that a lot of these politicians are compromised. And the ones that are extremely recalcitrant, we're just going to have to put extreme pressure on them and show how recalcitrant they are. So we have a plan, and we're executing it. But this isn't going to be an easy slog. I mean, I've been at this for 22, 23 years when I started researching writing about the Franklin scandal. But, I got to tell you, James, just the fact that it's gotten this far is like a dream come true to me. Because I went through some very dark years thinking that none of this was going to be exposed.
Once again, that is Nick Bryant of EpsteinJustice.com. And for anyone interested in Epstein Justice, I suggest you go to their website. You can find out more about the regular webinars that they do on an ongoing basis to train people in activism and how they can raise awareness about this issue. And they have various campaigns that they are involved in on an ongoing basis. Again, trying to achieve justice for these crimes. So people who are interested, please check that out at EpsteinJustice.com. But as you can see, this is just scraping the surface of the 3.5 million pages of documents of the 6 million in the overall files, with almost half of the files having not yet been released. So obviously, this is too much of a research task for any one individual to be able to handle, so I need your support. I need your help. And I would hope that if there are any interested people in the audience who are interested in delving into these files and finding out more, that you will lend a hand to this open source investigation. And if you are interested in that, of course, you could go to the Epstein Library at the U.S. Department of Justice website. Again, the link will be in the show notes if you are interested. And you can try going through this, and I don't know. For example, we looked for hoofs earlier. Is it going to find it here? Oh, okay, yeah, it can be functional, and you can find these emails that way. Or you can start browsing through them, and if you do so, you'll find the Epstein Files Transparency Act release, and I don't know, go into dataset 10, and just like the JFK files that we looked at last year, these files are, again, totally, utterly useless, just random numbers. And who knows what you're going to find when you click into something. Is it going to be an email? Is it going to be a document? Is it going to show something? Is it going to be a picture? I don't know. How could you possibly know? Oh, yes, of course, this document. Again, how useful is this? Not very, and perhaps that is part of the point. Confuse and distract. So if you want a more robust way of searching through these files, you can go to jmail.world. For those who don't know, this is a handy service that has been put together that takes all of these emails and documents and photos, etc., and puts it as if you are logged into a Gmail type interface as Jeffrey Epstein. It is not just Gmail, it's also Yahoo, it's the documents, it's the photos, etc. But here it is. And so as, for example, before we were able to search, for example, you search the word hoofs and you'll find that Kathy Rumler email. Or, well, here, guys, let's find out. Ooh, is Corbett in the... Oh, no, Corbett is not in the Epstein files. Et cetera, et cetera. So you can search that way. You can search... there is also a list of people that you can search through, so you can see all of the Elon Musk emails, etc. Things along those lines. There's a lot of different features here. I saw somebody in the comments earlier asking about the photos and how do you find the photos that are apparently being published here and I can't find them, etc., etc. Well, here they are, and you can go to view original. That's a handy link to go to the actual justice.gov version that is contained in the files, and it'll have the URL there, etc., so you can copy that in. And again, there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of photos and documents here, and you can see them all and download them all, etc. And this even has a function, at least on the email part of Gmail, where you can see the last one that's at least recorded here in 2019 is from Cody Rudland, "You are dead, lol, good riddance." Okay. Wonderful. But there is a function for leaving notes as well on the sidebar. I'm in the mobile version of this, so you can't see it, but there is a function for leaving notes, and people are collectively leaving notes on these various emails, etc. Again, there's a lot to explore. You can see what Epstein was ordering on Amazon, etc. So again, all of this information in a much, much more easily findable form. However, having said that, some of these emails are not showing up in the Gmail search. Like, for example, we looked earlier at Nick Bryant showing up in one of these. But Nick Bryant's, that email about the APB of Nick Bryant is not searchable this way. You can find Juliet Bryant, whoever that is, but not Nick, etc. So there are certain things that just are not showing up here. So again, has all of the data been imported, and has it been done in the proper way, and are things being disappeared from the files, etc.? All very good questions that people need to start looking at and answering. Having said that, here's another interesting website. This one is a hat tip to my video editor extraordinaire, Brock West, who brought this one to my attention. I hadn't seen it. It's called Epsteinsecrets.com. And there you can see visually the Epstein network, for example, mapped out, all of the various people and who they're connected to. And you can sort how this map is shown, for example, looking at edges and people, and you can zoom in on various people and how they're connected and the documents that are connected to them. You can do searches. For example, remember that Kathy Rumler that Epstein was talking about genetically engineering pigs to have non-cloven hooves so they could be kosher? Well, who on earth is that Kathy Rumler person? There is a way to search this, and I know I have done it without logging in. But anyway, I'm not going to get it now. But trust me, there is a way to search this, and Brock will show it on screen, where you can find out Kathy Rumler. Oh, that's right. She happens to be with the Department of, she was in the Obama administration, and then went into private practice in the 20-teens, at which point she was contacting Jeffrey Epstein on a regular basis. So again, it's a handy search function for that sort of thing. There are tools like this that exist, and if you know of any other research tools for going through this massive, massive amount of files, please bring them to our attention. I'm sure we would be interested to hear about them. Having said that, I do know that there are those who will simply fold their arms and, interestingly, in an exact parallel to Donald J. Trump, say, let's move on, there's nothing to see here, whatever, who cares, essentially. Remember when Chomsky said, who cares about 9/11 or JFK, etc.? Well, it's who cares, whatever, there's nothing of importance here. It's all fake, it's all a psyop, and or it's all been scrubbed. Well, be that as it may, I don't believe that. These are real emails that really took place between thousands and thousands of people, real documents that have been verified, and that not a single person has said that isn't an email that's fake, let alone the thousands of people who are implicated in these emails. None of them have stepped forward to say that's fake. No, these are real emails that really took place, that really contain information. Does this contain the video of the, whatever, blood-drinking child sacrifice? No, of course not. That is not in here. But there is a lot to garner from here. As you've seen, for example, Sayer G and others mining these documents, Aaron Day with the Bitcoin documents, etc. There's a lot of information to go through. So I will say, counter to those who will tell you it's a nothing burger, it's a psyop, don't look at it, I will say, you can choose whatever you want to look at or not look at. If you don't want to research this, that's fine. But if you do, I would very much appreciate your help, because I am going to continue looking at these documents and what they do reveal about the kakistocracy that, yes, many people in my audience, thankfully, after decades and decades of people like Nick Bryant and others reporting on this subject and staying on it for decades, in which they've been dismissed as crazy conspiracy theorists and wild loonies, finally being vindicated. And then there are those who will just say, just stop looking. I do not believe that. I think we should be looking at these and taking them for what it's worth. Obviously, this is not the bottom of the rabbit hole, but it is some way down and further than we have been before. So there is important information. Get it before it gets scrubbed, because you know they are working on scrubbing various pieces of this puzzle as they are being reported. Having said that, I am interested in what you find. So if you are a Corbett Report member, please go to corbettreport.com, log in, leave links, data, information, tools, etc. Whatever you find in the comment section at corbettreport.com/Epstein-Files. I am looking forward to what you find, and I will, of course, be reporting more on this subject in the future. But that's going to do it for today's exploration. I am James Corbett of corbettreport.com. Thanking you for joining me for today's episode.